afternoon and thanks for joining us. I'm Judy Simpson. Many people utilize the new year as a time to review their personal affairs and do some planning for the future. With that in mind, today I've called on two guests to share their tips and advice on issues that affect seniors. We'll also give you information about the assistance that's available for seniors in Vermont. Joining me are two attorneys from Vermont Legal Aid. They each help older folks with financial or legal difficulties. Jacob Spidell focuses on legal problems affecting senior citizens, and his wife Christine Spidell works with Legal Aid's Low Income Taxpayer Project. Thanks again for coming in. Now, Jacob, your work centers around Senior Citizens Law Project. What is that?
The Senior Citizens Law Project is a part of Vermont Legal Aid, and we represent people aged 60 and over in Vermont who have civil legal problems.
Can you give me some examples or an example?
Yes, so we often represent people who've been improperly denied public benefits, people who have housing problems like no heat or an improper eviction, and we also represent people who are being taken advantage of and who need legal action against the person who's taking advantage of them.
And so how can viewers learn more about that?
There's two ways. There's the statewide Vermont Legal Aid 800 number, which is 800-889-2047, and people can call that and get immediate help. Another way to get information is to visit the website vtlawhelp.org/seniors, which is the Vermont Law Help website. We have a lot of information for seniors there.
Now, Christine, we've talked about the Low Income Taxpayer Project before and Across the Fence. Can you sort of remind viewers what that is?
Yes, it's a project funded by the Taxpayer Advocate Service, and I help people with IRS problems, such as if somebody's Social Security is being garnished by the IRS, that's a case that I would help with. And we also do some advocacy with the Taxpayer Advocate Service to try to get policies and procedures changed if they're unfair to taxpayers, to clients. So if we identify issues and then we work with the Taxpayer Advocate Service to make changes on a national level.
Okay. Jacob, I understand that you have some tips and things that seniors should be thinking about as they're planning for their new year, but I guess Vermont Legal Aid doesn't offer estate planning advice, but there are some things people can be thinking about.
That's right. So Vermont Legal Aid won't prepare your will for you or design your estate plan, but we do get calls when people get into trouble. They get into sticky situations, and often it's because of things that they've done that they thought were responsible estate planning. And so I wanted to get the word out about how to avoid getting into that sort of trouble.
Do you have some tips?
So one of the big problems we see is that people do what they think is responsible estate planning when maybe they would have been better off doing nothing or being a little more careful about what they did. So one thing that we see is there's this idea that you should sign your house over to your kids. And this can be a really big problem. And there are better ways to accomplish the same things.
I mean, the intention is good. You want the house to stay in the family, or you don't want to have it sold after, you're dead. You want to make sure that your assets go to where you want them to go, but there are right ways to do that and some wrong ways.
Right, and sometimes people are worried about estate taxes as well. But, all those concerns, keeping the house in the family, avoiding estate taxes, there are usually better ways to accomplish those than just signing the house over to the kids.
Right, and you had an example that you wanted to share with us too.
Yes, so I had a client who had added his grandson to the deed to his house, and the grandson ended up moving in a couple of years later and forcing the grandfather to move into the basement where they didn't have running water. So at that point, Vermont Legal Aid got involved, and we had to bring a lawsuit against the grandson and reform the deed. But if the deed had been written a little bit differently, this never would have been a problem. If the deed had been clear that the grandfather had the exclusive right to live there while he was alive.
I think a lot of people in Vermont rely on just handshake agreements, and they really get into trouble when down the road one of the parties reneges and, like in Jacob's case, forces his grandfather to live in the basement,
right,
or kicks them out entirely. If the title is in the child's name, they have the right to that house if there's no protection.
And things change year to year too in different situations, so you can't say just because the relationship is great now,
right,
it's always going to be great.
Right.
Now, Jacob, you explained earlier how this type of issue can also impact Medicaid eligibility. How does that happen?
Yes, so one big problem that we see is that people are applying for Medicaid and then they find out that something they did that they thought was responsible estate planning is disqualifying them from long-term care Medicaid. And so long-term care Medicaid is a program that pays for long-term nursing care, either in a nursing home or at home. A lot of people aren't thinking about that in advance when they're doing their estate plan. But Medicare, which most seniors have, doesn't pay for that. And it's very expensive. It can be hundreds of thousands of dollars. So most people can't afford to pay for it out of pocket. So once they do need this care, they're trying to figure out how to pay for it.
And how far back do they look to see when you transferred property?
And so the government program that does pay for long-term care is long-term care Medicaid. And when you apply, they put on the application, did you give away any property in the last 5 years? And if you did, you can be disqualified. And the reason behind that rule is they don't want someone who has lots of money to give away their money and then want the government to pay for their care. Long-term care is something that has income limits and asset limits.
But the senior will say, well, I didn't give it away, I put it in a trust.
Exactly. And so what's tricky is that putting property into a trust is considered giving it away. And adding someone to the deed to your house can be considered giving away that property. And so people who weren't thinking about Medicaid at all, who did what they thought was estate planning, putting property into a trust or changing titles, can apply for Medicaid and find out that they've given away property. And
Even if they didn't think they were giving it away.
Right.
Right. And so there are ways to accomplish these types of planning that won't interfere with Medicaid eligibility. But it is a dangerous area for someone to put things into trusts or change ownership around without asking the question of how this is going to affect potential Medicaid eligibility.
See, I wouldn't have even thought of that.
So basically, we just want people to ask the question and talk to a lawyer when they're doing this instead of trying to do it on their own, just because they've heard that their neighbors have done something.
As a matter of fact, I mean, that there are forms that people can download from the internet that says, oh, this is a trust
To do
kit.
almost anything, right?
Yeah. And so there is a lot of misinformation around estate taxes.
Yes, and the limits, I mean, really, estate taxes only affect a small percentage of the population. The federal exemption is over $5 million now.
Yeah, so I'm out.
Right, I think most of us are out. And even out of Vermont, estate taxes you have to worry about if you have over 2.75 million, which again, I'm out.
Yeah.
So I think people need to get some facts before making changes like this out of fear of estate taxes.
And so, Jacob, if you meet with a lawyer, it's important to ask for advice, but ask the right questions.
Yes. So sometimes I have people who come in where the deed to their house is not good, it's causing them problems. And they had a lawyer prepare the deed. The problem is that maybe their son or daughter took them to the lawyer and told the lawyer, we want you to prepare a deed transferring the house to me, the child. And the lawyer said, okay, I can do that. And the lawyer did the paperwork that they were asking for. So if you are hiring a lawyer to do some sort of estate planning, make sure you're asking them, first of all, who are you working for? Are you working for me or for the person I'm giving the property to?
Interesting.
Because you want to make sure the lawyer knows who their client is and you know who they're working for. And then second, you want to ask, is this the right way to accomplish my goals? Is there a better way to do this? Because sometimes if you don't ask, the lawyer's not going to tell you. And maybe it costs a little extra to get the advice about what to do, but it's better than paying for something that's going to put you in trouble.
And so is there a solution for people who want to keep their house in the family, but, and what about a bank account situation? What should people be doing?
So with the house, it sounds like a good idea to just transfer your house to your children. And same thing with a bank account. If you want your children to be able to help manage your money, if you can't, if you become unable to do that, the problem with adding children as joint owners on a bank account is then your money is their money because they're a joint owner. And so even if your children are the most honest people in the world, if they get into financial trouble or if they get divorced, your money and your house are tied up in their divorce or their debt collectors are going after your assets. So there are good ways to keep your property in the family without opening yourself up for those sorts of problems.
Right, it's called a joint fiduciary account, right? The bank account, where you can add your child as a fiduciary.
Yes, that's right. So there's a special type of bank account, and the way you set this up is you go to the bank and you say, I want a joint fiduciary account, and ask the bank if they have that. Some banks do, some banks don't. And if you do that, the money in the bank account is still yours, but the person you add as the fiduciary is able to help make sure your bills get paid out of that account, but they still have a responsibility to manage the money for your benefit. They can't just go in and take all the money out, which
they can do with a joint bank account. It's 100%. The other person can come in and take it all.
Right.
They're legally entitled to.
And even though it would be hard for a parent to think that their child would do something like that, as you say, everything changes.
Right.
And so that's kind of a scary thing. How about a financial power of attorney? Is that a better idea too?
It is. It can be a better idea. So with the financial power of attorney, you're appointing someone to act as your agent. And you can give them the power to act as your agent with respect to a specific account. You can say, this person can pay my bills and get the statements from this account. Or you can give them broader power to manage your financial affairs, make sure your mortgage gets paid. You can even give them the power to buy and sell property. If you think maybe you'll want to sell your house and maybe you won't be able to manage that on your own in the future. And so a financial power of attorney can be a really good option for people.
So is there anything else that you advise seniors to think about?
So financial planning for seniors has two big parts.
Okay.
One is making sure that after you die, your property goes where you want it. A lot of people think about that. But an equally important part is making sure that while you're still alive, you still have control of your money, you're protected, and sometimes those are a tension because people do things to try and keep property in the family, but it causes problems for the senior while they're alive.
I think what's really interesting too is that a lot of seniors think about when I'm gone, but they don't think about, well, what if, I'm not gone, but I still don't have sort of control of my faculties and, plan for that inevitability.
Right. It's hard to have those discussions with your children, I think. With any family member, it's just hard to talk about what might happen if you become unable to manage your affairs or what you might want.
And so let's talk about where people can get more information and help with some of the things we've been talking about. Can people call the Senior Citizens Law Project with any legal problem?
So Vermont Legal Aid has a single intake line, which is that 800-889-2047 number. And so if someone has a civil legal problem, which means it's not a criminal problem, you're not being charged by the police, any other type of problem, they can call that line.
And Vermont Legal Aid a couple of months ago actually developed a new system where if people call that number with a new problem, they should get to talk to a lawyer right away. So we have lawyers on the line waiting to talk to people and figure out what resources are available or if it's a case that somebody can take.
And it's a good idea too to call if you have these questions, because it's really important to make sure that you're doing the right thing when you want to do the right thing.
Right. We do have a lot of information on our website, but we know that some people don't have access to that. So if people call, then we will print out some of the materials and forms for them and send them to them. So even if people just need information about powers of attorney or something like that, we can help them if they call.
And once again, don't just, if you do go on the internet, just because it's on the internet doesn't mean it's a good idea.
Right.
Have you seen some of those examples?
Well, yes, and in the tax world, there's certainly a lot of misinformation about what your rights are and what's possible to do. So definitely, I think calling the 1-800-889-2047 if you have any questions or need information is always a good idea.
Any final thoughts for our viewers?
Don't transfer your property to your children without talking to a lawyer.
Right. There are good ways to do it. So if your lawyer is telling you to transfer your property to your children, that could be a good idea. But make sure you're asking them, who are you representing? Is this going to affect potential Medicaid eligibility? Why is this a good idea? Mm-hmm. And one thing that we didn't get into is healthcare planning. Whenever I talk to people, I say everyone should have a healthcare advance directive. And that's a way to say what healthcare you want and what healthcare you don't want.
I just did mine, so.
Excellent. Well, I want to thank you both for joining us today. That's our program for today. I'm Judy Simpson. We'll see you again next time on Across the Fence.